Welcome back, fight fans, to another video here on The Fight Game. All great sagas in boxing are generally built upon one cardinal factor, and that's the importance of a great rival. Rivals bring the best out of one another, they intensify the publicity, they raise the stakes, and more importantly, they create entertaining storylines which stand the test of time for the generations that follow. Muhammad Ali's was Joe Frazier, Canelo's was Golovkin, and in this video we take a look at one particular rivalry that spans over the course of 4 fights. That rivalry is, of course, the unforgettable battle of Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez.
Marquez is no sparring partner, but Pacquiao has great talent. Good left hand set by Pacquiao. An amazingly even fight, and the straight right hand by Marquez hurt Pacquiao.
These two boxers are backed by entire countries. Marquez, who has the fighting support of Mexico by his side, and Pacquiao, who has the fighting support of the Philippines by his side. The Filipino fire and the Mexican warrior. The lightning-fast razzle-dazzle and the astute counter-punching combatant. These two boxers come from places worlds apart, yet when they meet inside the boxing ring, their worlds are indistinguishable. The rivalry began after Pacquiao dismantled Marco Antonio Barrera during his takeover of the featherweight division, becoming the featherweight lineal champion. Marquez was already an established champion, and made himself known as a great fighting warrior from Mexico. This was a matchup between someone who has always belonged at the top of the sport and someone who was just on his way. Little did we know how great this fight would turn out to be, and for how long this story would continue to unfold. The fight started with Pacquiao and Marquez on their toes, in and out looking for openings. Marquez is a technical counterpuncher, and Pacquiao is an aggressor, but both love a war. Marquez's counter right hand would be difficult to get past, but Pacquiao's attacks would also be difficult to time. But it wasn't long before both fighters were battling it out.
Exposed when he throws his punches.
And he's getting picked off down the middle by Marquez as he did on a quick left hook there. And he fires the straight left hand.
Pacquiao scores the first knockdown with a feint left-hand combination. Marquez got back up.
Position to get hit with a straight punch.
And he got hit with another one and another one.
He's hurt.
Down he goes now.
Pacquiao knocked him down again with another left hand. The knockdowns wouldn't stop there, though.
That momentarily backed Pacquiao off.
But he's going straight back.
Third knockdown of the first round.
Pacquiao uncharacteristically throws an illegal blow after a third knockdown. Props to Marquez for getting back up. Marquez survived the round, and in round 2, the momentum continued. Marquez now with a massive mountain to climb after only the first round.
Great left directly on the nose.
Pacquiao had great head movement in this fight, and he really pushed the action to win, because a win would mean so much over such a great Mexican fighter like Marquez. But don't make the mistake in thinking that Marquez would let Pacquiao win easily. Marquez was no stranger to tough fights, and like all great Mexican warriors, he showed up to fight. Although Marquez had the Mexican heart, Pacquiao had the Filipino ferocity. Marquez and Pacquiao are such great fighters, and great fighters always produce truly great fights. Pacquiao pushed the action. Marquez was looking for counters, but Pacquiao's unorthodox movement was proving hard to time. Tensions continued to rise as both fighters refused to take a step back. As we enter the middle stages of the fight, it was Marquez who began to push the action. But not because Pacquiao was getting tired or anything, but because Marquez was beginning to find a way to disarm the attacks of Pacquiao by stepping back quickly, letting Pacquiao jump onto counters. Marquez used his footwork effectively, using his reach to keep Pacquiao just at the end of his punches. Marquez began to do what he was renowned for: world-class, elite counterpunching. When you combine relentlessness, intelligence, and brute force, you get Juan Manuel Marquez. But Pacquiao is just an absolute monster with the Filipino fire in his heart. Watch here. Marquez feints to the body, prompting a reaction from Pacquiao with the lead arm and directing all of his attention down below. Then Marquez comes up around the side with a massive right hand. This is an incredible attack by an intelligent boxer. Pacquiao, after a massive 3-point lead in the first round, looked to be getting beat to the punch. But you can never count out the Filipino warrior in any moment of any fight. The fight so far was definitely close. Both fighters had landed some truly eye-catching punches, and as we approached the end of the fight, the winner seemed to be totally unclear.
Showing the courage and the fortitude to put himself back into this fight.
I feel like giving them both the stand.
Some judges would prefer the non-stop high output of punches from Manny Pacquiao, while others may prefer the more clinical counter-punching from Marquez.
Fire against fire. Down the stretch. Pacquiao's left. Marquez is right.
The fight ended, and it took the hearts from all boxing fans around the world. It went to the scorecards, and no one knew who was going to take the victory. Marquez thought he did enough, but so did Pacquiao. A lot of people thought Pacquiao won because of his continuous assault.
And Bert Clemens scores the bout. 113, a three-way split. The bout is a draw.
However, the fight ended with no winner and no loser.
Of a great fight in which both the attacker, Pacquiao, and the counterpuncher, Marquez, had seemed to succeed in applying their craft. And based on that fight, no one would have expected that 4 more years would pass before they'd meet again.
A lot of fans wanted an immediate rematch, but unfortunately the rematch would not come anytime soon. After such an electric showdown, it would be a long time before the fans saw those two particular boxers in a boxing ring again. The debate continued about which fighter deserved to win the fight, and neither fighter was willing to accept a loss.
I'm confident that I won that fight.
Yo creo que hicimos lo posible para haber ganado. Yo siento y la gente sabe de que esa pelea la ganamos cerrada, pero la ganamos.
But of course, life continued. Training camps progressed and new fights were made, and the path of Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez began to diverge, although they somehow always felt intertwined. Pacquiao would jump up to the super featherweight division and compete there, including an exhilarating trilogy with Eric Morales and his second victory over Marco Antonio Barrera. Talks always existed of a potential rematch between the two, but those talks really intensified when Marquez would also go on to beat Marco Antonio Barrera in the same year, winning the super featherweight world title. In the next year of 2008, the world of boxing finally got to see the second showdown between Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez, fittingly billed as unfinished business. Manny Pacquiao comes out as an icon for the Philippines, and Marquez comes out as an icon for Mexico, and together they became an icon for boxing. 4 years after their first meeting, 2 of the top 5 fighters in the world meet again, in a clash of the best that boxing can offer. The fight began tentatively. Pacquiao, being the younger fighter, had more to correct and improve. Entering this fight, Pacquiao was more seasoned, prepared, and equipped to deal with the counter-punching capabilities of Marquez. Although Pacquiao is by nature an aggressive fighter, he turns it off and on with more focus on his boxing ability. Marquez, however, is always a live dog in any fight.
Wait till after Pacquiao lands.
This right hand was the highlight of the opening round. Marquez continued his jab, and Pacquiao continued in an attempt of landing the left hand, but it was Marquez who nearly scored a knockdown at the end of the round.
In this exchange.
Uppercut by Marquez. Huge left hook. Buckled Pacquiao.
Marquez takes a subtle step back, then lands a massive left hand when Pacquiao is out of position. Marquez continued gaining momentum with some great shots.
Absolutely, Larry, you're right.
And the straight right hand lands right down the pipe for Marquez.
This can change back and forth from this right here.
Down goes Marquez on a straight left hand shot.
In a massive shift of momentum, Pacquiao is the one who scores a knockdown with a downward-pointing trajectory left hand. Marquez would get back up and survive the round. Marquez retaliated in the following round, but would be met with the full force of Pacquiao's fierce left hand. The middle stages saw back-and-forth action, with Marquez and Pacquiao both landing their destructive backhands. This fight so far was just as even as the first fight. All viewers got their money's worth that night, that's for sure. The consistency of each fighter landing their respective backhands was very high. You punch, you land, I land. Here Pacquiao lands a bruising left hand to Marquez's cheekbone.
This round, this could be crucial.
Solid shots by Marquez, and he ducks Manny's return left. All of Manny Pacquiao's triumphs against Mexican fighters. And driving Pacquiao back. That 1.4%.
At the start of the championship rounds, Pacquiao landed this crazy left hand.
Perfect uppercut by Marquez. Pacquiao trying to swing away with the left hand.
As the fight comes to an end, both fighters give it everything. Their heart, their strength, their skill, and their desire to win the fight.
To that area where he may need a knockout. One more right hand for Marquez. One more combination for Pacquiao.
What a fight it was. A true testament to the sport of boxing and a prime example of what it can produce. Such an incredible fight by two such incredible fighters. Although, of course, as the story goes, the scorecards followed.
To the winner on split decision and new champion from the Philippines,
Pacquiao won by a 1-point margin. The knockdown he scored in round 3 ended up giving him that 1 point he needed to win the fight. Of all the punches they threw, it was that one singular punch in round 3 that secured the victory. The world would continue to reflect on this amazing two-fight affair of Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez. Much like the first fight, there was still debate over who's actually the better boxer.
I felt my guy did enough to win the fight, and I thought the knockdown was the icing on the cake.
Of course, Pacquiao deservedly took home the belt, and in doing so, he became the first Asian boxer to win a world title in 4 different weight divisions. But considering only 1 point separated them over 24 rounds, fans couldn't help but ask for a third showdown. Perhaps the most sobering element of this saga is the difference in journeys both fighters would go on to make. Marquez would go on to win world titles at lightweight against Juan Diaz, but would struggle to reach the heights he felt he deserved to be at. He then suffered a defeat to Floyd Mayweather, and although he had the nation of Mexico backing him, it was a difficult time for Marquez, who felt he'd be at a different place if he had won the fights against Pacquiao. Pacquiao, on the other hand, would go on to reign through boxing's weight divisions, obliterating all those who stood in his way, and became the world's only ever 8 weight division world champion. The hype surrounding Manny Pacquiao in 2008 through 2011 was unfathomable. He was the most popular, most exciting, most ruthless, and most genuine fighter the sport had. But like all great champions, each boxer had their match, and there was no better match for Pacquiao than Juan Manuel Marquez. The long-awaited third fight between the two so closely matched fighters was eventually scheduled to take place in November of 2011. Marquez sought after the glory and fame he felt was wrongfully taken from him by the judges, whereas Pacquiao aimed to silence all doubt with a definitive victory on all accounts. The fight wasn't about determining the best in the sport, it wasn't about crowning a new champion, it was about settling a score. This time the fight took place at welterweight. The arena was, as you would expect, packed with fans from around the world. When you consider the time between the fights of this rivalry, you come to expect that each fighter has matured in some way. But instinct is something that remains completely unchanged. This fight started a lot slower than the previous two, but the dynamic was practically identical. Pacquiao initiates, Marquez responds, then a roaring blaze follows. Marquez was doing much better this time around, although Pacquiao's output was considerably higher still. It's difficult to argue who found most comfort in the higher weight class of welterweight. Pacquiao was stronger but a little slower, which was beneficial to Marquez as he could never match Pacquiao's speed. Marquez's style was also more suited to rematches. He's a boxer first and foremost, and that's something that can evolve through various fights.
Hard right hand by Marquez. Pacquiao was knocked back on his heels.
Here, Marquez lands a monster right hand through the guard of Pacquiao.
And there's a hard left by Pacquiao, and a good right hook, and another left.
But here Pacquiao responds with his blitzing speed and combination punching.
Ring authorities now vigorously discourage even round. There's a perfect right hand shot by Marquez.
We're seeing how effective Marquez has been landing with those clean.
Pacquiao is ensuring himself. Good left hand shot by Pacquiao. Marquez wants to answer right away.
Here we see another display of Marquez sending the right hand straight down through Pacquiao's line of sight. The same story continued. It is Pacquiao who throws the more punches, but Marquez who lands the cleaner shots. The winner is really determined by what kind of fight the judge is looking for. By the 12th round, Marquez's trainer had told him in the corner that he was winning the fight. However, to most of those watching, the scorecard was expected to be yet again extremely close.
This was a tremendous tactical error, I think, by Juan Manuel Marquez, who finally runs with Pacquiao at the end.
But unlike the first two fights, it finally looked like Marquez might have done enough to win the fight. Here we go again.
By majority decision, and still WBO welterweight champion of the world.
It was Pacquiao who took home the victory. This time, however, many fans disagreed. The crowd in the arena booed and voiced their anger towards the decision. Marquez once again had come up short. In a close fight between two great warriors, once again the victor is controversial, doubted, and catechized.
Would you consider fighting Marquez again at some point in your career?
Anytime. I'm a fighter. My job is to fight in the ring.
The highs and lows of boxing strike for a third time, but something this time felt a little different. There are two sides to every fight, and two sides to every scorecard. As with all results in boxing, some felt it was wrong, and some felt it was just. There was much talk about how Marquez may have left his foot off the pedal towards the end of the fight, as his corner thought a win was secured. And there was other talk about how Pacquiao didn't quite manage to land the eye-catching, match-winning shots he did in the first two fights. Luckily for the fans, they didn't have to wait years for the next meeting to take place. Amidst the controversy of the third fight, a fourth fight was fast-tracked and took place the following year. These two men had fought a total of 36 rounds, and yet we still had no definitive winner. But boxing is a sport that thrives on controversy, bad blood, and eccentric storylines. That is what makes boxing, boxing. There was immense pressure on Pacquiao to make this the final time they met. There was also immense pressure on Marquez, who likely felt disheartened going into the fight, considering how hard he fought in the previous three fights. It might have been hard to imagine how hard he would have to fight to actually walk away with a win. But it was generally agreed that this was it. This was the final fight. There must be a clear winner this time. Pacquiao was coming to fight, and so was Marquez. This was the fight of their lives. This fight started with much more similarity to the first fight. Both fighters were very energetic and ready to make sure of a victory for this fourth and final time. There was no feeling out process here. Marquez, however, looked very reserved, not throwing much as he remained very cautious. To the shock of the thousands in the arena and the millions watching around the world, Marquez floors Pacquiao for the first time with a catastrophic right hand. Marquez had just thrown a king off his throne, and now the crown was there for the taking. But a crown isn't taken with one punch, and Pacquiao fought valiantly to keep it.
Good combination by Pacquiao. Uppercut inside by Pacquiao. Right hook by Pacquiao. Another good right hook by Pacquiao. Great right hand by Marquez. They trade shots again.
And Pacquiao's giving him some feints. And Marquez right there.
And there goes the knockdown.
Now it was Pacquiao who scored a knockdown with a sharp left hand. Just like that, all the momentum was now in Pacquiao's favor, who continued to outbox Marquez, landing thunderous left hands.
Because of the blood in his mouth.
Pacquiao lands
his
another
nose.
straight left-hand shot, and another.
He's not getting up, Jim. He's not getting up.
He's been knocked out. A sensational right-hand knockout by a bloodied Juan Manuel Marquez.
Marquez absolutely demolishes Pacquiao with one of the most devastating right hands you'll ever see. This time, he would not get up. When it comes to counterpunching, you don't get much better than this. Pacquiao jumps in, Marquez moves to the side and swings a massive right hand to the face of Pacquiao. Juan Manuel Marquez had just knocked out Manny Pacquiao. The punching power was the product of Pacquiao's momentum jumping in, meeting the full force of Marquez's right hand. If there had been debate about the previous 3 fights, there was no question about who won this one. Marquez had finally done it. He dethroned a king, he won for himself and for his people. After so many years, the victory was finally in his favor. That was the end of the story of one of the greatest rivalries the sport of boxing has ever seen. Pacquiao and Marquez would never meet in the ring again, and ultimately they don't have to. When all is said and done, each fighter takes away a win from this epic rivalry. They gave everything they had to the sport of boxing, and they must be appreciated for that.
I didn't see his pants, and I'm so overconfident that I thought I got him.
There are few fighters in the world like Marquez and Pacquiao. They fight for themselves, of course, but for their countries too. For those who support them, for those who admire them. It was never about the money or the fame. It was always about them, who they are, and who they might become.
Thanks, Manny. Again, you are a great fighter. Great fighter.
It's not often we see fighters treat the fans with 4 fights of toe-to-toe wars. And for what it's worth, Marquez and Pacquiao have done a great service to boxing. And in a sport where things are forgotten too quickly and backs are turned too often, it's gratifying to know that Pacquiao and Marquez will not be remembered for money or trash talk, but for their humility, their character, and their greatness of not only boxers, but as human beings too. That is the story of Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez. We'll see you in the next video here on The Fight Game.